Public Library. My name is Kyla Epstein, and I am pleased to be the chair of the Vancouver Public Library Board of Trustees. A few things. If you are, please stay if you are not a wee one, but if you are a wee one, there is story time in the Elma room just outside here for children. We wanted to try, the library staff were very generous in offering a combined event for children. I think my child is going to do his own story time over there. Also, please make anything quiet that might make noise or disturb this evening. And the rear doors at the back are where you go in and out if you need to use the restrooms, which are just around there, or if you need to leave before the event is over. Now, I'll apologize, I'm going to be using notes to read because I didn't know I was going to introduce this event until late last night when I realized that Nick Maskey, my dear friend, was going to be reading, and I had to ask the library staff to quickly prepare some notes, so thank you. I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging that we are in the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. And we are pleased to present tonight's event in partnership with Caitlin Press. We're so pleased to support independent publishers in Canada. At this book launch, you will hear from Vancouver women authors who have written about the joys and struggles of immigrant living in Canada. A yellow dress with ruffles, a kind grade 1 teacher with a last name difficult to spell, cockroaches in the bathroom. These are portraits of cultural misunderstandings, bureaucratic hurdles, and attempts to navigate unfamiliar landscapes. Before we get to tonight's event, I would like to share some information on a current project that may be of interest to you. And let me say that as a board member, I get to be proud of a lot of VPL's work and the amazing staff here. This is especially exciting to me. The Vancouver Public Library is currently collecting oral recordings of your stories for a project called Story City. Stories of migration to Vancouver, stories of historical change in Vancouver, or experiences living in Vancouver as part of a particular group or identity. These stories will be posted on a website for everyone to listen to. If this is of interest to you, please leave your contact information with VPL staff who are here, or get in touch with their staff another time at any of the branches or locations. And this project is made possible by the Community Fund for Canada's 150th. Please join me for tonight's event and give a warm welcome to Miriam Matuyova, editor of Wherever I Find Myself. Thank you. Thank you. Hi. Does this work? Thank you very much for the introduction. This book began with rejection. About a couple of years ago, I wrote a brief personal story about what it feels like to be a Canadian immigrant woman. And for many years before, I had felt lonely and misunderstood. And I felt that writing about my experiences would help. And it did. And I actually really liked that piece too. So I sent it to a few people for review, and they liked it as well. So then I sent it to magazines and literary journals, and it got rejected over and over again. And the stream of rejections that I was getting went on for about a year, maybe longer than that. And now I really, really don't like rejections. I don't think that anyone does. So usually about a year of trying and failing at something convinces me to just give up on whatever it is that I'm trying and failing at. But this piece that I wrote was different. And the more rejections I got, the more convinced I became that I need to share it. And at one point I did almost give up on it, but then instead I decided that I'm going to go bigger and louder. So I decided that I was not going to only share my piece, just my own. I decided that I was going to share many more pieces like that, written by Canadian immigrant women about Canadian immigrant women. And I got really, really excited about this idea. And I immediately contacted Caitlin Press and Nikki Johnson, the owner, and I told her about what I wanted to do. And she told me two things. The first one, she said, you're in luck. And I thought, okay, well, that's nice. So she said, you're in luck because I'm shopping for new book ideas. I thought, okay,
okay, good. So the second thing then she said was, Miriam, I like this idea. Actually, no, scratch that. I love this idea. And that felt really, really nice after that stream of objections that I got for about a year, probably more before. So Vicky is not here, unfortunately, tonight, but I'm really, really very grateful to her for listening to me back when I was talking about this book, and for actually thinking that this book is a good idea, and it's a beautiful book. So my vision for this anthology was to have a collection of stories that doesn't only that shows the immigrant experience or the immigration experience as it truly is. It's not just filled with hope and with gratitude, but it's also filled with loneliness, disconnection, and alienation. Immigrating, leaving one's home and settling in a new country is a difficult experience, physically of course, but emotionally. And that emotional cost, that price of immigration is often hidden. And I think it's important that we talk about that and that we read stories that express this emotional burden that comes with immigration. So it is not only about gain, it's also about loss, and about loss in many, many forms. And many of the authors in this anthology have conveyed this message of loss in one way or another. And all these experiences, all these stories are very different, but they somewhat also have something familiar to them. And I'm hoping that sharing these stories will open up a space for discussion, for reflection, and that this may eventually lead to more tolerance, acceptance, and compassion. And as much as I believe that Canada is a stronghold for multiculturalism, I think that it's really, really important that we talk about these stories and that we have more tolerance and compassion. Thank you. There are two things that I would like to say, I think. On behalf of Caitlin Press, I would like to thank Bravo.ca, one of Canada's success stories in independent media, for proudly sponsoring this event today. And also the team at Caitlin Press, and I would like to thank the Vancouver Public Library for hosting us here tonight, and special thanks to Jenna for organizing this space and for Children's Librarian providing story time next door. Thank you. So what I would like to do now, we have 9 wonderful contributors to this beautiful anthology today, and they're all going to be reading excerpts from their stories. I will introduce each one of them before they read, and I think we will maybe take a couple breaks before the event is over. So the first one up is Gianna Fanner. She's a student at UBC, actually. She's studying English and managing social media for Canadian women in the literary arts. Like many Vancouverites, she loves figure skating, yoga plants, and coffee. And like many Filipinos, loves adobo, karaoke, and her family.
Hi, everybody. I wanted to thank all of you for coming out and for everyone who helped make this book and this event possible. Especially those of you who are in a position like me where I should probably be studying for final exams. So my story is called 57%. Unfortunately, it won't make a lot of sense unless you read the rest of it. My dad participated in National Geographic's genographic project. He paid about $100 for the kit, which uncovered his ancestry and explained where he was from. And they say you're almost always surprised by the results, my dad said excitedly, repeating this tidbit every time the subject of the project came up. He made it very clear from the beginning that this was something he wanted to invest in. Neither my mom nor I protested. I think neither of us really saw what the big deal was. You won't have to do it, Dad explained to me, because ours will be the same, but you, he looked at my mom, would need to do your own. My mom smiled complacently and half shrugged. No, I'm not interested in that kind of thing. You're not even curious, Dad said. as if not being curious about one's ancestry was a betrayal of identity. As I understood it, the process involved taking a cheek swab, which was painless according to the website. Then the National Geographic scientists would mail back a fancy box with a pamphlet and a link to a website that would tell the story. In my dad's case, it would be the story of a man who lived in the Philippines all his life, at least until making the move to Canada, who found out he's not actually from the Philippines. My partner James calls himself Dutch, and looking up at all 6 foot 1 inch of him, he wouldn't doubt it. I told him an orange tulip for If you ask him further, you'll find out that his mom is Canadian. Because he was born here, James is content to call himself Canadian as well. I've met James's extended family a number of times. His closest relatives live on Vancouver Island, so they come only for special occasions. His Uncle Hans has thinning gray hair, smile lines, thin-rimmed glasses, and a single earring. He often wears tight-fitting shirts. Conversations he's had with his nephew, at least the ones I've overheard, have included topics such as which kind of barbell to use for bicep curls and counting calories and macronutrients. I guess Uncle Hans is the cool uncle. Uncle Hans' partner Bernard is more reserved, with a quiet but quick sense of humor. In the few instances we've met, I have never heard him raise his voice, which is low, collected, and humbly intelligent, in contrast to Uncle Hans' loud laugh and outspokenness. Last summer, the two of them came without James's cousins. We were sitting out on the deck for dinner, having what is traditional fare in James's household over the summer. Fresh greens from the garden, some source of protein, and probably applesauce. This was the second or third time I had met Uncle Hans and Bernard in a year and a half of dating James. We were talking about the absences of floors in some buildings. James's brother, who worked in a building in downtown Vancouver between school terms, was talking about the missing 13th floor in his office building. Uncle Hans, sounding worldly and intelligent, commented on the arbitrariness of such superstitions. I mean, think about East Asian cultures. The Chinese buildings usually don't have a 4th floor because the number 4 is unlucky for them. He looked to me. It is 4, right? Do you know why that is? There was silence for just a second too long. I felt the heat rush to my cheeks as I realized why he was asking me. I don't know, actually, because I'm not Chinese, I said awkwardly. Oh, said Uncle Hans. I'm sorry, you are Filipino, I replied, trying not to be embarrassed or irritated or anything. Can you imagine what would have happened if I had told him I was Canadian? Wouldn't that have been kind of funny? It's certainly the truth. But then why would it have been funny? I am Canadian. I'm Canadian too. Somebody cracked a joke about all Asians looking the same, and James's mom, trying to ease the tension, said, yeah, because we all look so different. Uncle Bernard, who was sitting next to me, turned and said in his quiet, relaxed voice, you don't look Chinese at all. For some reason, I remember this being reassuring. Phew. My physical attributes, my unchangeable physical attributes, are not falsely representing my identity after all. I smiled good-naturedly and shrugged like it was no big deal. Well, actually, I was reading a book about the meanings of numbers, and I read it's because the Chinese word for 4 sounds the same as their word for death. Everyone chimed in, oh, that's interesting. And in my memory, the moment moves on, and we probably talk about other things, probably about lifting weights and big biceps and healthy wrists, and probably nobody else except James remembers this moment, and probably when I fill out forms asking about my citizenship, I need an option to check off Canadian, sort of. Later that evening, James and I were in his room watching Netflix. In disbelief, I murmured, I can't believe your uncle thought I was Chinese. I'm so surprised he just assumed that. Were you offended? Asked James. No, I said immediately. It's just weird. I'm used to people asking, but people don't usually just assume. James turned to face me. Seriously, you can tell me. Did that actually offend you? No, I insisted, even though I think some part of me must have known it did. Still, I knew James would not hesitate to talk to his uncle about it if I had admitted I was offended. And I think a bigger part of me wanted to avoid that kind of conversation. Are you sure? I nodded. Yes. Okay, said James, turning his body back around. He relaxed. I clearly didn't. There's nothing wrong with being Chinese. There's nothing wrong with looking Chinese, whatever that means. My dad will scoff at anyone who says that a person looks Filipino, because that doesn't mean anything. He'll point out that he is darker skinned, but will say with complete certainty that his mother-in-law has skin as white as snow and would pass for white. He'll point out that there are Filipinos with flat noses and there are Filipinos with long, skinny noses. I'll point out that there are tall Filipinos and short ones. Doesn't mean anything to say someone looks Filipino. I've been approached at the bus stop by strangers who are talking at me in rapid Korean. I've been told I look Vietnamese, Chinese, Malaysian, or, with a tone of surprise, not Filipino though. I wouldn't have expected it. Thank you.